justice in your name. Amen. You guys can have a seat. So this is the first time I've actually led something in church for about 2 months. In July, I transitioned out of my role as a pastor at Campus House, where I worked with Erin, and that was a joy. She's great. Give it up for Erin. Good. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Where did she go wrong? Oh no. I also told Shane that I was just going to make fun of him, and that would give me enough credit with you guys that I could say whatever I want. So I think it's going to work. Make sure my mic, it's on. It is. Yep. Okay, good. If I need to switch to that, I can too. Anyway, July was the first time in over 8 years where I have not been, employed full time at a church. So it's been some weird mornings, like no 6 a.m. Saturday night, I'm out late, in bed, but I can stay up, so that's fun. But I'm excited to be with you guys to kind of break that fast, if you will. But it's interesting as I think about those 8 years. About 8 years ago, this past spring was my first full-time job as a pastor, and I was at this little church in Crawfordsville. And my first day on the job, let me back up just a little bit. So they offered me this job as the worship pastor for this church. And they're like, it's all great. We love you. We love, we'd interacted with the elders and with the hiring team. And they're like, we just want you to come, lead one service, and that'll kind of be your final phase of the interview, and the job is yours. So I was like, great. So I'm walking out of this meeting, and they're like, oh, by the way, just wanted you to know, the pastor and the elders are going through mediation. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but it sounds good. And they're like, it's not a big deal. They're working everything out. It's fine. Just wanted you to be aware that this was happening. So I was like, okay, great. So I go and I lead worship the first service, and there's another service after Sunday school. But instead of Sunday school, everyone gathers into the sanctuary for this church meeting. And I don't know what's going on, so I'm just sitting in the back, kind of back by the sound booth, by the doors leading out of the sanctuary. And the elders go up to the podium, and they fire the pastor. Come on. And I'm not kidding you. And I'm sitting in the back center, the entire left side of the church. So 300 people stand up and walk out, all of them filing past me as I'm sitting there. I cannot imagine what they were thinking about poor little 19-year-old me. That was rough. But what's interesting is that the people that left, they were actually in support of this. I guess they just went to Sunday school then. I don't know. But the rest of the people had no idea this was coming. They were so upset. They did not want this to happen. And so they were up at the podium. They were asking questions. They were trying to figure out what was going on. And instead of, having this conversation, they just turned off the mic. They turned off the mic as if that was going to solve all of the conflict, right? You just turn it off. And I can guarantee you it did not solve the problems. That was not a peaceful transition. And I ended up actually staying. I left that day. I was like, kind of dust off my feet kind of thing. Like, you win some, you lose some, and I'm out. But I really felt like I was supposed to stay. So I did for the next year. I was kind of helping keep this church afloat. But underneath the surface, there was so much bitterness and resentment because that conflict, it never got resolved. And it took a long time to get there. But long story short, turning off that mic, it did not bring peace. And so this is the first thing I want to say about peacemaking. There's some things that we think about when we say peace, but this is not what Jesus is talking about in this passage. And the first one is this: silence is not peacemaking. Silencing conflict does not deal with the antagonism, with the pain and the resentment underneath the surface. Does not deal with the pain in our relationships. Does not deal with the injustices in our world. Silence does not bring about peace. The second thing is that punishment is not peacemaking. We cannot punish our way into peace. A few years back, Emma and I bought our first house, and we had been renting it for a year at that point. And when we moved in, we had these lovely neighbors, Jeremy and Heather, and we were moving in, and they were out front smoking a cigarette, and our houses are literally 5 feet apart. It's really close. And as we're walking in, I'm carrying boxes or something, and I wave, and I don't really see how they respond. I'm preoccupied. Well, Emma waves, and she gets the bird from Heather. And so we're like, great start. Wonderful. This is going to be swell. And it gets worse. So Emma has had chronic illness most of her life, and part of that is she passes out sometimes. And so she's had several concussions. And what that means is that loud music, really bad. Actually, at the Mint Festival, we were enjoying the scenic downtown North Judson. And as we were leaving, the music was just the right kind of loud. And Emma had a seizure right there on East Talmer. And so our friends know loud music, loud bass subwoofers, not great for us. And Jeremy had these huge stacked speakers in their house pointing directly at our house, just feet away. And so he would blare music all the time. It was miserable. It's like, physically painful, not just annoying, but like a health hazard for us. And so we would go over there every night, say, like, please turn it down. Most of the time he was not sober. There was often, they were fighting all the time. It was a miserable, you could tell they were miserable, but that passed on to us, And one night, it got so bad, and this happened several nights, where it's just like they wouldn't respond, so we would call the police, and the police would show up, and maybe it would turn off that night. But it'd be right back on, and they would not be happy, right? So trying to punish them, trying to use our local sound ordinances to write them up, it did not bring peace. It did not solve our problems. But instead, over the next 2 years, we just kind of showed up. We mowed their lawn when they were gone. We talked Jeremy down when he was drunk. We bonded over mushroom hunting. We tried to get to know their dogs. We bought them food on the holidays. They found out they were pregnant, and so we brought them diapers, and we were trying to walk them through what pregnancy was like and those sorts of things. I helped Jeremy get a new job that had hours that worked for being a dad. And it took years. But by the time we moved this year, and so 4 years of living with them, basically, we were basically living with them, they had gotten rid of their sound system. We waved when we passed on the street. We stopped and talked in the store when we were getting groceries. We texted each other pictures of mushroom hunting, which grossed Emma out, but it was, you win some, you lose some. And, recipes, pictures of baby JJ, and Heather, who at the end of our time, here are the tears, she's talking with Emma, and she just said, I'm really glad that you're my friend. Shane, come on. So, trying to get them written up, punishing them with the laws that we thought we were trying to keep them under, it didn't bring peace to that friendship. And so punishment is not peacemaking, because punishment, as 1 John 4 talks about, it has to do with fear, and fear, it doesn't bring peace. And I was talking to Meg this week about the inadequacy of punishment in the justice system. She shared about this. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, in TV shows and movies, they call it solitary confinement. But this restrictive housing, it's used as a way to punish inmates to kind of keep them in line when they make a mistake. And you're isolated in a cell alone for 23 hours a day. It's dirtier, it's darker, it smells bad. And it's supposed to discourage bad behavior, but when the inmates come out, they are angrier, they're more depressed, they're more prone to violent behavior. All of this stuff is worse. It exacerbates the problem. It does not make it better. Punishment does not bring peace. The third one, tranquility. Now this is a common one, right? When we think peace, we think serenity, peace, tranquility. But this actually misses what Jesus is talking about here. When Emma and I first got married, we were close friends with this other couple our age, and the wife, she had this personality. Maybe you know someone like this, but it's like nothing fazed her. You know, we could never get a rise out of her. Politics, sports, world news, theology. It was like nothing. It was just like all the time, tranquil posture every day. And she would get comments all the time like, "You're such a peaceful person." And a few years later, after she had her first child, she started having these chest pains. And so they ended up taking her to the ER, and it turns out there was nothing physically wrong, but it was just anxiety. She had massive anxiety. And so as they started to explore what's maybe the source of this, this seems new, this is not normal for you. Well, it turns out she responded like, actually, this is how I've always felt. I've always been this way. I just didn't know it was anxiety. I didn't know that's what this was. So this tranquil exterior was a facade. It was just a way of hiding and pushing aside the anxiety. And the last 5 years, I've primarily worked with college students. And there's this kind of personality shows up all the time, where it's a very, on the surface, a peaceful, tranquil person. But you would bring up an injustice or a political upheaval or these deep issues of faith, and the response would be, God's in control, everything's fine. And I could say, okay, maybe this is faith, but actually what would be going on is that they were choosing ignorance. Instead of entering into the painful thing and saying, wow, this is hard, this is heart-wrenching, and I still trust God. It was, I just don't want to think about this. Therefore, I can be comforted. I can be at ease. I can be tranquil and calm. But tranquility is not peacemaking. We can't sacrifice peace and justice just so that we don't feel the pain of those things. And the last thing, avoidance is not peacemaking. And I don't really love this story. It's a little bit embarrassing, but here you go. Before Emma and I met, I was in a very serious relationship with this girl from high school. We were about to get engaged. Everything was like heading towards this like future in my life, and it ended. And it did not end well. It was messy. Words were said. It was painful, and I was crushed. Now, fast forward years later, Emma and I are married. Dakota is married as well. And I was totally fine. You know, I'd forgiven everything. I was at peace. But then we get invited to our best friend's wedding, and they happen to be the sister-in-law of my ex-girlfriend. So Emma and I are driving to this wedding, and I thought I was at peace, but it looks like Emma and Dakota are going to be spending the whole day together without me. And I realized I was not at peace. I just wanted to avoid this problem, this person, this whole situation. I just wanted to avoid it, and that would have felt like peace to me. But avoidance is not peacemaking. Instead, peacemaking looks like finding out at the end of the day that Emma and her should-be rival ended up sharing a car, sharing clothes, sharing stories over breakfast. All of this culminating in this dramatic moment where Emma drops a box on her toe, bloody toenail, ripped off her toe, and Dakota washes her foot in the sink of the church bathroom. So instead of this awkward, painful, messy day, a real friendship is born, and actual peace is made. Even if it was still awkward for me, but it was fine. It was fine. But avoidance is not peacemaking. And even more, when we avoid conflict, we don't just avoid peace, we avoid the real presence of God. We all know this Matthew 18 phrase. We say it all the time. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am with you, right? But Jesus is not here primarily talking about a worship service or a Bible study. The context for this phrase that Jesus says is conflict. This is the verse in the passage where Jesus is talking about making right with those who have wronged you. That when you and your sibling are at odds, go make it right. Bring others with you if you have to, but go to them. Work through the conflict. And when you do, I am there with you. Don't avoid. Go, enter in, make peace. And so, peacemaking is not silence. It's not punishment. It's not tranquility. It's not avoidance. When we look at this beatitude in Matthew 5, it can be tempting to read, "Blessed are the peaceful." Blessed are the silent, the tranquil, the conflict avoiders. But this word, blessed are the peaceful, it's blessed are the aire napoias. It means one who makes peace. One who reconciles those who are in disagreement. It's not blessed are the peaceful, the pacified, the placid, serene, untroubled, even-tempered, conflict avoidant, tranquil, quiet, nice people, but the peacemakers, those who wade into the mess to bring peace out of a unpeaceful situation. One of my professors in seminary, Marshall Hatch, he had this phrase, and I love it. It's, if peace is to be had, peace must be made. If peace is to be had, peace must be made. We are peacemakers. The problem, though, is that as we look at our world, as we look at our church, as we look at our families, peace, where is it? We just moved this summer, and we inherited the landscaping, gardening that the previous owners had done. It was pretty eclectic, is maybe the word you could use. And not really sure what they were doing, but there was something there. Things were growing. And at this point in the summer, most of the plants are dead, or they're dying, or they're weeds, as you can see here. Except this one volunteer sunflower. Sorry, this video is very choppy. So you can see our weeds there, and then randomly we get this beautiful sunflower. We didn't plant it, but the seed lay dormant over the winter, and the conditions were just right, and this flower sprouted into this beautiful, singular plant. And to me, this is the metaphor for peace in the church. Imagine with me that the church for 2,000 years is like a garden. The first gardeners were a community of people who were tending to the garden, and they planted, on one hand, the seeds of faith. What we see right here in the Sermon on the Mount, these seeds of faith. The way of Jesus. They were planting those. These seeds would grow into the fruit and the vegetation that would sustain God's kingdom on earth. And then alongside those seeds of faith, they would sow the seeds of their culture, of their history, of their time and their place. So seeds of faith, seeds of culture in this one garden. And maybe that sounds bad, right? Like you should just have the seeds of faith. But first of all, it's just unavoidable. It's going to happen anyway. It's expected, and I think it's even right that this garden would grow into a unique source of vitality and sustenance for that community. And it matched their needs at that specific moment in time. And that requires having these cultural seeds, the shared language and way of seeing and viewing the world. And as this garden is tended across the generations, those seeds of faith are replanted, and so are the changing seeds of culture and history. But as time goes on, it can get confusing which seeds are actually the seeds of faith and which ones were actually the seeds of culture and time and place. And they start to get entangled, get weedy, confused. And as early as the 4th century, the seed of faith that we find here in Matthew, the seed of peacemaking, is all but choked out in the garden of the church. But in small pockets these community gardens and hidden greenhouses and basement hydroponic cellars. You get maybe these seeds that continue to be watered and tended and cared for in these vibrant little communities. But in the many gardens that are Christianity today, peacemaking is mocked, suppressed, ignored, or crushed. But deep in the soil of this garden lies the dormant seed of peacemaking. It cannot be crushed. We cannot erase it. It cannot be extracted from the soil. The seeds are there. And if we look across history, we can see these volunteer sunflowers that pop up when something happens and peace shows up. The conditions are right. A community stumbles across something and peace. And then there are communities who have tended to that all throughout the last 2,000 years. And so we can look to them and we can find these principles and practices of peacemaking that maybe we could take on, that maybe we could create a soil that's healthy and sustaining for that sunflower of peace. So I'm going to name 3 principles of peacemaking, 3 ideas that if we catch them, if we fertilize our souls and our communities with them, then maybe the flower of peacemaking can flourish in our midst, not just as a pleasant surprise, but a purposeful act of following God in the world. So this is the first one. The means are the ends. The means, so how we do something, are actually the point. Whenever peacemaking or nonviolence or this whole topic comes up, the first objection every time, and I've had lots of talks with college students, and they love to talk. But the objection every time is that it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And so they throw out a scenario where the only logical option is murder. And you're, oh, where? How did you jump from here to here? And, maybe, over, food or coffee or something, I could explain to them, like, there are always other factors going on. How could you, in that moment, choose love in a way that also is protecting? But do you have to jump to death every time? And so we could have those kind of minute conversations, but this is exactly the point. We immediately jump to something that justifies abandoning peace. We always can find an end to justify the means. We can always find an end that's strong enough to make us abandon the way of Jesus. And that is dangerous territory. Because there's always an end that's big enough or bad enough to warrant absolutely terrible behavior. All of the atrocities of human history have found and used some noble end. The famous Pax Romana that was in place during the time of Jesus, which is the peace of Rome. But people would look and say, the peace of Rome. Rome makes a desert and calls it peace. And this is a nuanced conversation, right? There's a lot of factors going on. And peacemaking does not mean we do nothing, right? That's what we just said, right? Silence, tranquility, avoidance, that's not peacemaking. Peacemaking is active. If peace is to be had, peace must be made. But, and that's this point, that activity, our activity, whatever it is, we always must constrain it to the means that Jesus laid out. How we do what we do is more important. And that is so hard to grasp in this economic world that we live in, where it's all about what you can produce. What can you create? What is the end goal in mind? But the way of Jesus says that it's actually the way itself that is the goal. Living the way of Jesus is the end. Our ideals mean nothing if we don't live them out. Our intentions do not matter if our lives don't match them. Our theology is a waste if it doesn't make us like Jesus. The means are the ends. And that's because the means shape who we are. And that's the second point. Peacemaking is about becoming. How we live is who we become. Every act of peacemaking transforms us as it transforms the world. And the reverse is also true. Every time we abandon peacemaking, we are transformed, and so is the world. So it's this question that we have to ask as a church and as a local community. Who do we want to become? Who do we want to become? And the third thing is that it starts with us. Peacemaking starts with us, and it requires faith. And this one's tough for me, because peacemaking is not always an effective strategy for winning. And I like to win. Unless we're playing card games, and then I feel bad for winning. So I lose on purpose sometimes. Anyway, peacemaking is not always an effective strategy for winning. Now, I would argue that a lot of times it actually is, but it's really hard. It's really hard, and that is why no one does it. It is too hard, and we don't know if it's going to work. It requires faith. According to Stanley Hauerwas, peacemaking is the only Christian doctrine that doesn't work out logically. A lot of the other ones, you can think through this, and there's metaphysical, spiritual things that we can't really know, but most of it's like you can logically work this out, not peacemaking. Peacemaking requires trust that in the end, whether we succeed or not, God will make things right. Even if our peacemaking efforts fail, God will complete the work. Most of the time, I think when we abandon the way of Jesus, it's because we don't think it's going to work. We don't think it'll protect us or our families. We don't think it's going to make enough money to save for retirement. It's not going to win an election. It's not going to grow our church. So we try other means instead. And maybe it's not a wholesale abandonment, but we sprinkle other things in. But this is precisely the point of the church in the world. Not to be successful, but to be faithful witnesses to the reality that there is another way of being human. Our commitment to the way of Jesus, even at the cost of our lives and our goals and our finances, is a radical act of faith that we are chosen to perform. I want to take just a brief sidebar to talk about salvation. This is not an altar call, by the way, but if you want to come out, go for it. But I need to talk about this because I need you to understand where I'm coming from when I talk about the need for faith and the purpose for peacemaking. I am what you might call a hopeful inclusionist. That's like the big theological word. But in that group are some of our favorites like von Balthasar, C.S. Lewis, N.T. Wright, Jürgen Moltmann, Brad Jersak. All this really means is that I believe in the end that God will make things right. Ephesians 1, Revelation 21, Psalm 103. That over the course of eternity, God will, as Samwise Gamgee says, make everything sad come untrue. And for me, this means that the vast majority of humanity over the course of history is being drawn into the beautiful vision of God's loving, restorative, healing embrace. That the God of creation revealed in Christ will draw humanity into his love. And I hold out this possibility that some will reject this, that some have been walking the path of pain and destruction so long that they have become it. Because what we do and who we are, it's what we become. But I have hope that over the course of eternity that God might lure them, heal them, draw them, convince them to abandon death and to join us in the light and the life of God. And I believe all of this is possible because of Christ on the cross. Romans 5, though all were dead in this pattern that we see in Adam, now in Christ all are made alive. Or as 1 Corinthians 15 and Hebrews 2 tells us, on the cross Jesus destroyed the power of death. Because of Jesus, death does not get the last say. At the end, Christ puts death to rest. So what does this mean? When we say salvation then, from this view, what does that mean? As we read the Gospels, as we read the New Testament writers, we get this picture of salvation that it shows up every time someone embarks on this journey of God's kingdom way. Every time someone awakens to the reality that there's another way to be human in the world. So Luke 19, when Zacchaeus comes down from his tree and he abandons his greed and his wealth and he finds joy in making peace with the poor and restitution with his victims. Today, Jesus says, salvation has come to this house. So yes, I believe in salvation. I believe that God so loved the world that he sent his Son to draw humanity, not to condemn it, but to save it, to bring it to life. And we need it because we live in a world of destruction and death and violence and pain. And as we participate in it, it crushes our souls. It shrinks our humanity. It deadens our ability to relate to each other and to God. We need salvation. Not a future escape or an award achieved by checking the boxes on our doctrine and belief, but salvation is receiving the love and mercy of God revealed in Jesus, and then taking on a new way of living and being and relating in this world. Jesus showed us it's his way. And as we live it, we become more human. We are saved walking in this life he achieved on the cross. Now, whether you land in the same place on how we figure out all of the minor parts of that, that's okay. But what I want to get across is that as Christians, our purpose is not to convince the world of some doctrine that will help them escape punishment. Yes, we share the life and love of God, and that this way is better. And we believe there really are consequences for living in ways that are against the way of God in the world. And we invite them to join us, but we entrust their souls to God. Their souls are not actually our vocation. Our vocation, our calling, is simple, but it is very, very hard. It is simply to live as the people of God in a world that is antagonistic toward living that way. We do this as witnesses who trust that God is making all things right. We're to be the people that Jesus describes in the Sermon on the Mount. The poor, the mourning, the meek, the hungry for justice, the pure-hearted, the peacemakers. And we do this not because it gets us power, not because it builds our churches, not because it grows our offering, not because it's good for business, not because it makes us a good citizen, not because it's effective. We do it because it is who we are. We are children of God. Children of God are the peacemakers. So is it a wonder that the world is not drawn to God's way when it has not seen the children of God being peacemakers? If we don't do it, no one will. It starts with us, and it requires faith. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Being a peacemaker is what it means to be a child of God, to be the people of God. This means it's not silence, it's not punishment, it's not tranquility, it's not avoidance. Peacemaking is the ongoing activity of reconciliation and justice-making in the world in such a way that it's confined to the pattern of Jesus. I say that again. Peacemaking is the ongoing activity of reconciliation and justice making in the world in such a way that we build our pattern, we box ourselves in to only living like Jesus. Peacemaking requires that we pay attention to who we are becoming. That what we do and how we do it shapes who we are as humans and as communities. We are either becoming more connected, more in love with the divine, more loving, more beautiful every day in every action, or we are shrinking, being compressed and diminished, closing off our relationships, losing our connection to the divine, and taking the world with us. And lastly, again, peacemaking starts with us, and it requires faith. It's hard to do. But we trust that God in Christ, creator of all, Savior of the world, will make things right. And that our participation, this faithful witness, we trust that God's going to use it. That we don't even get to really know how. If you do a deep study on the book of Revelation, it is probably my favorite book in the Bible, which it definitely was not growing up. Or maybe it was, but for the different reasons. But this book is all about how being the faithful people of God, it doesn't always look very right in the world. It doesn't look very successful. But that in the end, it's that very act of commitment, that patient, enduring commitment to God's way, that's what God uses to bring about reconciliation to the whole world. That's my faith, Like, that's it right there. Jesse, would you come pray for us? Maybe something in there will stick for me, so.
I wonder, I don't really know how to follow that up, because nothing I say is going to, that was good. I wonder if we have a little bit of time here. I wonder if we just have any thoughts or questions that Ralph can answer, not me. I just feel like when I hear this, it's like, this is compelling, right? Like, this is a narrative, this is a story that sounds good enough to be like the gospel. Like, this is compelling enough for me to want to just forsake everything else and say yes. Like, knowing that it is incredibly hard, right? But this picture is one that is so counter to the world and makes sense that this would be the way that God would use to redeem the world, right? To reconcile all things to himself. And just thinking that, like, that this is, as the church, like, we are called to be a community that embodies this, right? This is the purpose of the church and of being the people of God, being the children of God. Does anyone have any thoughts, any questions? I knew you would. Steve, what you got?
Steven. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then could you just flesh that out a little bit, how you see that reconciliation and justice making?
Yeah. Yes. So peacemaking is the ongoing activity of reconciliation and justice making in the world in such a way that it is confined to the pattern of living that we find in Jesus. So, there are lots of people who are working for justice in the world, and not all of them are Christians. And I am of the persuasion that I would love to just bless that, come alongside that. Yes, work for justice. However, for me as a Christian, there are certain practices that I will have to limit myself to. Certain ways of being that I cannot go forward with. And honestly, I'm not too concerned about judging how others do it. But for me and my community, where we are locally, we have a set pattern of living, and it looks like loving my enemy. And so there are versions of justice that don't look like loving the enemy, that look like actual hatred. And yeah, maybe it's sticking up for the little guy, But it fails to see that even the enemy is, for God so loved the world, that he sent his son here, for him too, for her as well. Is that, yeah.
When I consider people coming to a peaceful resolution,
Hmm.
even between me and them, I realize that I can't put too much emphasis on what they can do,
Yeah.
but I have to put the emphasis on what God can do.
Yeah.
If I don't do that, then I will become disappointed, and I will definitely stop trying.
Yes. Yeah.
So the idea that when we think that people will change their mind
Hmm.
because they are initially wanting to change their mind, it won't happen.
Yeah.
It only
Yep.
happens when God intersects their life through our actions
Mm-hmm.
or our prayers. And so we have to, like you said, in the context of who Jesus is.
Yeah.
Now, Jesus didn't come to a peaceful end,
Yeah.
right?
Indeed.
But, and neither did his disciples
No.
come to a peaceful end. But they showed that there was the community of faith that could change one another as a fellowship, and through that, love and care, that's what the world will judge us about,
Hmm.
our care for one another.
Yes. Is their love for each other that they will know, right?
So we may be successful in getting resolution, peaceful resolution, or we may not.
Yeah.
But the world will judge us not by that, but by the love we have for one another.
Amen. Yep. Nothing to add. Very good.
That's pretty much what you said, Rob, but I just am so struck by how hard this is, and I mean, it's just hard. So, I just think at work, I work in the probation office, but I am a case manager, so my role is to bring treatment and help and support. But I have the power to talk to this person's probation officer and say, hey, this person is not doing what they're supposed to, so can you put them in jail, or even sometimes it's not that severe, but just to someone fails a drug test over and over and over, they don't do what they're supposed to, and everything in me wants to just punish, right, or scold or whatever. But just thinking of the way of Jesus and how hard it is, to have faith, and it's just what he said, to have faith that this way is actually what is going to bring
Hmm.
salvation for people and love and light and all
Yep.
of that. And I also think, sorry, I also just think it takes commitment,
Yeah.
to commit to this way of life, your whole life, not just parts of it.
Commitment and a community, right? You cannot be a peacemaker by yourself. Because it requires, you just don't know. I do not see every perspective. And so I need a community to say, I think, Ralph, your intentions might be right, but that's not loving. This is actually not peace. It takes Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians that we have the mind of Christ. It does not say I have the mind of Christ. We, together, can discern what God is up to in the world, but not me by myself. I can see in part, but I need a community to help me figure out what that means.
I have to say, though, that mercy and love does not always mean bending rules or getting close. And Gail, I remember you shared with me about the story that Shane had shared. Even though he showed mercy, he did not back down from the rule, because the rule doesn't change. The law does not change. Standard does not change. Even though we show mercy and love, it doesn't mean letting people off
Right.
and forgetting the consequences.
Right. So, and this is the distinction between punishment and restoration. Right? So restoration does not mean no boundaries. It does not mean, reconciliation does not mean that I am now just whatever anybody wants to do. Like I guess I'm just fine with that now. And I call that peace. No, it means there's some tough love in there. I mean, just think about how Jesus talks to the Pharisees, right? He is holding them to a high standard. And he doesn't let Peter off the hook. When Peter abandons Jesus, he does not say, hey, look, it's fine. It's fine. I can take it. He says, no, I'm calling you to a higher standard. But there are limits to what that is. It's not punishment. It's not using fear and these punitive practices to uphold that. So it is complex. It's hard. And again, I think we need a community to figure out that line between punishment and reconciliation. Yeah.
Because I'm not sure that I agree in the
Please,
sense
yeah.
that, there were times when consequences would be too far off for my children, so I had some punishment
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah.
They were young because I didn't want them to run into the street and get hit by a car.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm
Yeah,
a
totally.
willful first child that would have done it just to be
Yes.
funny.
Yeah.
So in a sense, I understand that ultimately
Yeah.
punishing all the time does not bring peace.
Yeah.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But I can't rule out punishment as part of correction.
Yeah. And I think, even those two words, we're getting, really in the weeds here, but it's good because punishment and correction, those words are not the same. And so I think there is a way of setting boundaries and expectations. And so if you do this, then this will happen. And, my background is child development, actually. So as you progress as a child, there are certain levels where you really need concrete rules because you don't quite understand logic yet. So with younger children, 5 and under, you really can't reason with them. It's not like, let us think and contemplate your actions and how you could see this is changing who you are becoming as a person. You can't do that with a 3-year-old. But you can set very clear boundaries and you can hold them and not punitively, right? So the challenge, and I imagine as a parent that trying to parse out what is anger and fear in me or what is actually helping them to understand and grow. That those are really difficult things to parse out. And I think that's parsing that out is what we're called to do, is to say, actually, as a parent, I am going to lay this correction for this child, but I'm not doing it because I'm pissed at them. Or I'm terrified that they almost ran in the street, so I grab them and swat them and, whatever. There are other ways. And I think, shouldn't we as a church be on the forefront of creating an alternative way of being a parent in the world? And I think that's really beautiful. And I think, it gets real, when it's one thing to say, yeah, don't punish. But then for people you love, you want them to change and to grow. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up because that is really important.
As I pray, and it's just like God would bring to my mind about the Israelites. What was 11-day journey took 40 years. And, I said, Lord, this world, and I said, I pray, don't let us be for 40 years.
Yeah.
Help
Don't harden our hearts. Yeah, don't let our hearts be hard towards that.
But if they had to get that out of them, Egypt out of them, before they were allowed. And it's just like there's so much that's ingrained in us.
Yeah.
That God has to get it out of us to see His way is right, no matter how hard that it may be. And it's just like, and every little time that we see a glimmer of hope, that helps build my faith and helps me to grow. And He will say, remember when. Remember when.
Mm-hmm.
But it does remind me, this world is like, God have mercy on us.
Yep. Yes, indeed.
I think when you bring up the concept of children, it makes me think too spiritually when it comes to being peacemakers. Maybe spiritually, this is an area where we are children in, and it's something that we need to grow in, and we have a lot of grace
Yes.
seek God and move forward.
Oh, yeah.
I
Amen.
know, like, for myself, I hate conflict. It makes me sick. I get sweaty palms. I feel like I'm going to throw up. And so it's something that, for example, in my life recently, something happened where there was some conflict, and I really felt like God was asking me to buy a specific person a present for their birthday. And it was something where it's like, you would think he asked me to do something horrible, and I was like, no. Like, I
Yeah.
just don't want to do that. Like, I feel very uncomfortable, and there's a lot of healing that needs to happen there, but this is a small step forward. And maybe a small step with peacemaking is really just praying and saying, God, like, work, like, give me the faith to take the steps to do something small.
Mhm.
Help me to be faithful to pray for this person once a day or once a week, or maybe it's buying them a present for their birthday, or whatever that is. I feel like if that's something we don't have a ton of spiritual growth in, that is okay, because we are
Mhm.
meant to be growing.
Yes.
God has a lot of grace for us as we take steps forward.
Yes, well said. And thank you for adding that, because this is like, it's like if we're saying we're confining our whole life to the way of Jesus. Good luck, Yes, I do believe that that's what we're called to, and I fail every day. So we got to have some grace, and I would say I am a child in peacemaking, and I am conflict avoidant. I would literally rather shut my hand in a door than confront someone like that. I'm not joking, but it's we gotta do it, because I can't bring peace if I'm not willing to step into the lack of peace. Like, it's cool to be a peacemaker where there's already peace. Yeah.
One of the things that I kind of worked out in my own soul was that the Old Testament law was to love God and to love others. And Jesus referred to that, and he said that everything hinged on
That command.
And so he reiterated the fact that we need to love God and to love our neighbor, right? So we have the same condition, the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's the same requirement.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we get where we fail to where we succeed? It's by the Spirit. We have been considered dead to the carnal way of life so that we can accept a spiritual life. That spiritual life comes through the leading of the Holy Spirit.
Mm.
And that way, we don't have to pay attention. The law is dead. That kind of law of observing is dead. But we become alive to God's law of loving Him and others.
Yeah.
Through the Spirit.
Yeah. Well said.
I just was thinking too, I love that, the picture of the seed, and just the idea, like, of being so committed to the way. Like, I may not see the end, it might cost me my life, and it might look like it didn't work, but I didn't get to see the resolution of everything, and so just like, I'm not even doing this for the end. I mean, I want
Yeah.
that end, but it's like, be so committed to, like, this is the way, whether it looks like it, whether I see any kind of result, like, this is just who I want to be.
Hmm.
Just the way that leads to life, and yeah, just trusting God with that peace, and saying, like, I'm trusting that there's something going on underneath that I can't see that can bring to fruition, but yeah.
Yeah. It's who I want to become. That's who I want to become.
Yeah, I just love this because it is so all-encompassing. It's from the personal, as you guys know, I'm someone that also hates conflict, and I remember Beth was doing some marriage counseling with Meg and I, and I'm just like the story of that girl you told. Like, I would have thought from the exterior that I'm just a peaceful kind of guy, but then I had heart problems, and there's all this stuff going on the inside. I remember when Beth was telling Meg and I, she's like, look, if you have an issue, you need to bring it up. Rather than being passive aggressive and acting like everything's fine, but then, taking shots over here. Like, if there's conflict, you need to bring it up. And she's like, you've never done that. And so when you do it, you're probably going to, like, get angry, and you might yell, and it's going to take, like, practice in being able to, like, do that well. And Meg has to have the grace for me to know that I'm not going to be good at this, but I'm just trying it, right? And but it's so important to, like, step into that. So I just think even as a church community, like, to have the grace for each other to practice this. And, you know, maybe there is situations where there's some conflict and like, and we need to, where 2 or 3 are gathered. I love that idea. I've never heard that before. That's crazy. And so we need to talk about it, you know, and have grace for each other. There might be some yelling because we don't know how to do this well, right? But we're working at it. And in the context of the way of Jesus, it's just so beautiful. So it goes from the personal. So what are the areas in my life? Who are the people in my life that maybe I'm just avoiding, or there's just silence, or we're just acting like everything's fine and there's not? And, you know, who do I need to bring with me to this conversation to enter into the work of peacemaking? You know, and it goes from that to the world, our community, to the world, right? We get to enter into and be the people through which God is making peace and reconciling the world to himself. And so there's so much to think through here, so much to talk through here, and just excited to keep doing that with you guys. So thank you, Ralph, so much for bringing this up, and I wish you'd come back in next week and keep it up. But, yeah, we won't do a round of applause, but if you guys see Ralph, just thank him. Just some awesome stuff, and stuff we really need to keep talking through and thinking through. This is what it means to be the church. This is what it means to be the people of God. This is compelling. This is radically different than what we see around us. And so what does it look like to not be silent, to not rely solely on punishment, to not just be tranquil and avoid, but to actually, if we want peace, peace has to be made. How do we step into that and begin to practice that with others and as a community? It's a beautiful thing. So let's just pray real quick, and then you guys can be dismissed.